So, I want to discuss the fact that there's 300 plus murders in the city of Baltimore, which I'm from Baltimore. And I know most people would expect me to say Baltimore, but Baltimore is how you pronounce it. But I'm from the city of Baltimore. There are 300 plus murders. And I was listening to AM 1090 on the radio. It's WBAL's radio station. And the host of the show, can't think of the name of the show, but they were having a conversation about how their New Year's resolution for the city was to not have 300 plus murders next year. And I heard the announcement on the news that the 304th murder was announced this morning when I was driving. And the host's assertion in this particular show was that the new commissioners should be given the leeway and authority to, quote unquote, crack some heads and come down on crime really, really heavily so that these murders wouldn't take place in the city of Baltimore. Now, I'm in total disagreement with that for several different reasons. One, let's follow the Constitution, right? From a conservative perspective, right, we have a document that is supposed to outline the way government is supposed to run. And what we're faced with is a bunch of institutions that are not outlined in state constitutions or the federal constitution. And we seek for these institutions to solve our problems. Now, the issue is that these institutions will never be able to solve crime because the premise is wrong. You can't solve crime by some arbitrary institution. Particularly, we're talking about murder in this case. There are two main ways that I can think of how you would deal with such a situation. One, you stop this liberal nonsense of anti-gun legislation, right? That's one. Anti-gun legislation does not prohibit criminals. I know most people say, oh, that's a conservative talking point. But it's true. We know that criminals don't follow laws. They don't care what the laws are. If their intent is to commit a crime, they're going to try to figure out how to get around whatever the law is on the books. And so when we think about gun murders, for example, because if I'm not mistaken, not all of the murders in the city of Baltimore are gun-related, but I believe the majority are. Don't quote me on that. But if the issue is gun murders, and we're talking about anti-gun legislation and the fact that it is tremendously difficult in order to own a firearm, as far as when we're talking about handguns. Now, shotguns and rifles are different because they're not concealable, and even the laws with those require you to have them unloaded in the trunk of your car. And generally speaking, you cannot transport them. The last time I checked the law, you couldn't transport those firearms in your vehicle unless you were like management of some organization or company, and your employer, the owner of the franchise or wherever you work, gives you permission to carry that weapon onto the premises for protection purposes. Now, to me, that is insanity. to get into the core of the issue is if you relax the restrictions on firearms for law-abiding citizens, as they call them, then what could potentially happen is individuals would be able to defend themselves. The ability to defend yourself is a deterrent to would-be criminals, individuals who would assault you. If you take, for example, the reason why the rhino is not hunted down by predators at large is because the rhino is big and has big horns and is equipped to defend itself. So we see this in nature, but yet in our reality and the existence that we like to live, we think that somehow someone else should be responsible for defending and protecting our own bodies. Now, not to get off subject, but let's just touch the issue of pro-choice, right? The pro-choice is an issue, according to liberal philosophy, about one's right over their body. Well, couldn't we phrase the issue of the right to bear arms in that same vein? Shouldn't I have the right to protect my body since I have the right over my body? Shouldn't I have that right to protect my body? I, in fact, do have that right. The issue is that there are government institutions that prohibit me from being able to do so, at least in the city of Baltimore and in some other major cities, Chicago, New York, Detroit. Places I've actually been on business because I used to be a political activist. And what we called it at that time was an educational organizer. The issue is that how you solve the 300 plus homicide problem in places like Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles. The way you solve this issue is you allow citizens to arm themselves in their defense. And I shouldn't even say allow. That's the wrong term. The term is you get the hell out of the way. Stay out of the way. Don't prohibit me from defending myself because you have an issue with guns, because you're afraid of guns. And you'll find that as people are defending themselves, criminals will not be able to commit the crimes that they're committing. Young people wouldn't be getting shot in drive-bys and that sort of thing. Now, allow me to tell you a story. I was living in a very rough neighborhood, and I actually still do, but this particular neighborhood was over east, and I won't mention the name of the neighborhood, but it's over near the Greenmount area. I was living over there. And one night, I was on the porch with my mom and my roommate, and we were having a conversation. And a guy came down the street holding a gun, a pistol. Now, it's summertime, it's nighttime. There are still children outside because it's summertime. Now, one could argue that the children should have been in the house. But here's what happened. This guy saw someone he apparently had beef with or an issue with, and he began to shoot at the person he had a problem with a block away. A block away. Now, I don't know if he actually shot the guy he was trying to shoot, but there were children outside. And I want to be honest with you. If I was armed at that particular time, I would have done something about it. And I'd like to think that other people would have done something about it. Because you don't put children in harm's way because you have an issue with someone else. So that leads to the second issue, or the second way to deal with the homicide issue in Baltimore or any major city. The way you deal with it is morality, right? Morality is a big issue. Our country is slowly in decline, in a moral decline, spiraling out of control, on the verge of self-destruction because morality has been flushed down the toilet. And so when you're an immoral person, you can take shots at a guy from a block away and there's children on that block and not think twice about the ramifications and the people you might hurt. Now, that's not to say that he should have been taking shots at anyone for any reason other than self-defense and being in immediate danger. Let me clear that up. So the issue is his moral compass was so far off that he could do such a thing. And someone whose moral compass is heading in the right direction should have and would have interceded if they had the ability to do so. But we have to figure out how to teach sound morality. And people will ask, well, whose morality? Because your moral code is different from my moral code. Yes, that's probably true, and that's probably the biggest issue, is that we don't have a unified moral code because people want to live however they want to live at the expense and harm of others. If we can get back to a foundation of morality that says, hey, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't harm me or my property, then what you want to do is fine. Now, that's a more libertarian philosophical point, is that you're free to do whatever you want as long as you're not harming anyone on their property. And to me, that's a very, very sound foundation upon which to build a nation. Do as you please as so long as you don't harm anyone else or their property. Once we understand that, there would be no need to murder anyone if we all operated on that principle. So, just considering everything there is to deal with when it comes to a society operating peaceably with one another, we have to consider that government does not truly have the right to prohibit someone from doing something that is lawful. It is lawful to own a firearm, so government does not have the authority to prohibit the ownership of firearms. And yet and still, the people say and do nothing. And I've had this conversation with plenty of different liberals, libertarians, Republicans, Democrats, Green Party members, and you'll get a different response from different individuals. But the most logical people say, yeah, I think someone should be able to defend themselves. But in a state like Maryland, there are no self-defense laws. There's no protection under the law for people who are defending themselves, which is insanity. Again, these things lead to murder. And let me say this, and I don't want to sound cold, but someone who is shot by someone defending themselves because they were trying to do harm to someone is not going to get sympathy from me, because you are in the wrong trying to harm someone. And so if someone was murdered because they were assaulting someone else or attempting to assault someone else, that doesn't bother me. It does bother me for someone to murder someone because we are competing for drug sales and that sort of thing. And also, let me point out as I wrap up, what I'm saying is that some of the murders that happen in the city are revenge murders and might be considered justified from a certain perspective. Say, for example, if someone's sister was raped and they didn't get justice from the court system, and so they decided to take it upon themselves to take the life of the individual who committed the rape. There is an argument for saying that that killing was justified. There was a time where rapists were hung, but morality has changed, and so now we think, oh, the rapist is just sick and need mental help. And that may be the case for some rapists, but it's probably not the case for the majority of rapists. And so we have to think about these things from a constitutional perspective and a moral perspective, which I think is the greater of the two. But from the constitutional perspective, again, if people were not prohibited to defend themselves with firearms in the city of Baltimore, we would not have 300 murders, because the murderers would be on notice that if you're going to try to murder someone, you run the risk of losing your life. And that's a hell of a deterrent. Let me say that. Secondly, again, from the moral perspective, if people were willing to defend their neighbor from those trying to do them harm unjustly, again, you create a deterrent. If those who committed crimes were given appropriate punishment from a moral perspective, you create real deterrence from criminal behavior. We cannot expect for our cities to have peace and harmony when we won't operate from the rule of law and morality.